Have you ever really stopped to think about how all the stuff you own gets to you? Well, chances are it spent a long time floating on a massive ship, and at some point had to squeeze through a tiny, incredibly important stretch of water. Today, we're diving deep into these global choke points, the hidden, fragile arteries that keep our whole world economy pumping.
So here's the plan. First, we'll get a handle on what these choke points actually are. Then we're going to jump into three really fascinating real-world stories. A canal that basically ran out of water, a strait that's at the heart of a huge superpower rivalry, and a passage that's controlled by a nearly century-old piece of paper. And finally, we'll connect the dots and see why all this matters to you. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, what exactly are these so-called narrow arteries? Let's break down why these little slivers of water have such a massive, outsized impact on pretty much everything.
I want you to picture an 8-lane superhighway that suddenly, without warning, funnels down into a single tiny country lane. That's a choke point. It's a natural bottleneck that forces a colossal amount of traffic, ships, cargo, you name it, into one tight space. It doesn't matter if you're talking trade or military might. If you can control the choke point, you basically hold a key to the entire global economy.
You know, it's one of the great ironies of our time, isn't it? We live in this digital age of cloud storage, instant downloads, and streaming everything. But the physical truth is that almost everything we actually touch, from the phone in your hand to the food on your plate, spent weeks, if not months, on a giant container ship. And that hidden physical dependency makes our modern world way more fragile than we like to admit. So, what does that fragility actually look like in the real world? Well, for our first story, we're heading to the Panama Canal. The problem here wasn't a war or a shipwreck. It was something much more basic, a simple lack of rain.
It sounds like a riddle, right? What happens when one of the most important waterways in the world literally starts to run dry? Well, back in 2023, a crazy drought in Panama turned that riddle into a very real and very, very expensive problem. Because this whole amazing feat of engineering relies on one thing: fresh water. So what you're seeing here is Gatun Lake, and you can think of it as the heart of the whole operation. It's the canal's power source. See, every single time a ship goes through, it uses millions of gallons of fresh water from this lake to work the locks that lift it up and down. So you can imagine when a major drought hit and the lake's water level just plummeted, the entire system started to grind to a halt. And here's the bottom line, the direct result of that water shortage: time. On average, it added almost 6 full days to a ship's journey. Now, in our global economy that's built on just-in-time delivery, a 6-day delay isn't just a small hiccup, it's a catastrophe. It means factory lines shutting down and store shelves sitting empty. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. Who actually felt the pain? This table shows that the delays just hammered industrial supply chains, things like raw metals and machine parts. But look at the essentials, like food and fuel. They were much less affected. This kind of suggests a sort of triage system was in place, where either the authorities were prioritizing the most vital cargo, or maybe the big companies just paid whatever it took to find a different way around. All right, for our next choke point, the threat isn't the weather. It's all about warships and high-stakes global power plays. We're heading over to Southeast Asia, to the Strait of Malacca, a place that gives strategic planners in Beijing nightmares. This strait is, without a doubt, one of the most important shipping lanes on the entire planet. It's the absolute shortest sea route between the energy-rich Middle East and the manufacturing giants of East Asia. So for a country like China, it's a vital economic lifeline, but it's also a massive strategic vulnerability. And this number right here, explains everything. A staggering 80% of China's imported oil, the very fuel that powers its entire economy, has to sail through this one narrow passage. Just let that sink in. One single choke point controls 4/5 of the energy supply for the second largest economy in the world. That is the Malacca dilemma in a nutshell.
And you know, this term wasn't just made up by some think tank. It came directly from China's former leader, Hu Jintao, all the way back in 2003. And when he warned about certain major powers, everybody in the room knew exactly who he meant: the United States. The fear is pretty simple. If a conflict ever broke out, the U.S. Navy could pretty easily blockade the strait, and in doing so could choke off China's economic lifeline.
For our last story, the power to swing a choke point open or slam it shut doesn't come from rainfall or from aircraft carriers. It comes from the ink on a treaty signed way back in 1936. Welcomes to the Turkish Straits, the only gateway in and out of the Black Sea. So this timeline shows a really critical power shift.
See, after World War I, these straits were basically an international zone, open to everyone. But as things got more and more tense in Europe in the 30s, Turkey pushed to get full control back. And they got it with the 1936 Montreux Convention. And suddenly, in 2022, this nearly 90-year-old document became one of the most important legal texts in the entire world. Now, this is where you can see the real genius of this convention. It basically creates two completely different sets of rules. If your country is on the Black Sea, think Russia or Ukraine, you have pretty free passage for your warships. But if you're an outside power like the United States or the UK, you face really strict limits on the kinds of ships you can send in, how big they can be, and how long they can even stay there. And here it is. This is the convention's trump card. During a war, Turkey has the full legal authority to just shut down the straits to all military ships. This gives one single nation, a NATO member, by the way, a legal kill switch on who can get a navy into the Black Sea. And by using this clause in 2022, Turkey completely reshaped the naval battlefield in the Ukraine conflict. Okay, so we've seen how a choke point can be squeezed by nature, by geopolitics, and by international law. So what's the big picture here? What are the really important lessons from these stories about how fragile our world truly is? Well, the ripple effects are just enormous. For a government policymaker, a blocked strait is a national security emergency. For a trader on Wall Street, it's a huge source of volatility and maybe opportunity. For a big investor, it's a major risk that has to be managed. And for you and me, it's the hidden reason why a drought in Central America or a war in Eastern Europe can suddenly make the price of a new TV or even just your weekly groceries go up. And all of this leads us to one final, really critical question. In a world with a changing climate and with big geopolitical rivalries heating up, are these arteries that fuel global trade actually turning into our greatest weaknesses? The very system that built our modern world could potentially be the thing that brings it to its knees. It's definitely something to think about.